Welcome to Module 2. In this lesson, we will discuss the social construction of race, class, and gender. A social construction is defined by sociologist John F. Healy as a perception shared by members of a society or group that reflects habitual routines or institutionalized social processes. Social constructions such as race or stereotypes becomes real to the people who share them. Let's break this down. A social construction is not necessarily real in a biological sense. Instead, it is created and maintained by individuals and groups in a society. These created entities are perceived as real to those in society to such a point that they are thought as being natural. Social constructions are so embedded in our society that they are common practice or habitual, and in many cases, institutionalized. Race, class, and gender are all socially constructed. First, we will focus on race. Race, along with gender, is one of the first things people notice about one another. Race is defined by Healy as biologically an isolated, inbreeding population with a distinctive genetic heritage. Socially, the term is used loosely and reflects patterns of inequality and power. Racial groups are groups defined primarily by their physical characteristics. Race is not real in a biological sense. Humans share 99% of our genetic background. So, what is causing our difference, you may ask? We, or more specifically, those in power, signified skin color, and other phenotypic characteristics as distinguishing markers and those arbitrary body parts meaning. These biological characteristics and their differences determine individuals and groups' historical, social, and political realities. The dominant group has, or at one point in time, had sufficient power to create this distinction between groups and thus solidify a higher position for itself. These visible markers are incredibly salient. It would be very difficult to identify who was in which group if skin color and other prominent physical features did not indicate race. The system of oppression and privilege based upon race would collapse. Although race isn't real, its consequences are very real. Many people wrestle with race and its implications on a daily basis. Next, we will define social class. Like race, class is socially constructed. Healy defines social class as a group of people who command similar accounts of valued goods and services, such as income, property, and education. If we take a Marxian perspective on class, there are two major groups competing for the same scarce resources of wealth, power, and prestige. These groups are the bourgeoisie, or owners of the means of production, and the proletariat, the laboring class. In a class-based society, scarce resources are not distributed equally. Most of the power is in the hands of a few. The bourgeoisie are able to maintain their power by control of these means of production and the ideologies or common beliefs of society. Both of these classes continually struggle against one another for scarce resources. Marx contends that until the proletariat or working class understand their position and gain class consciousness or push against the dominant ideology of the society, they will continue to be oppressed. Film theorists Toby Miller and Robert Stam explain Marx the German ideology. Marx proposed a schema according to which the class that controls material production is also able to control mental production, with the result that the ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch ruling ideas. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. Film scholars Benthoff and Griffin contend that under capitalism in general, success is measured by wealth and the things it can buy, including power. Economic standing is arguably the most important gauge for assessing a person's social worth. Thus, the American dream has often been defined in terms of material wealth. The American dream can simply be freedom from want. Do you agree? Reflect on what the American dream means to you. Many people in our society believe that if they just simply work hard enough, anyone can be successful. This is based upon a system of meritocracy. Meritocracy is an ideology that presupposes that individuals are judged based upon the things they do. It does not take into account generational privilege or systemic forms of oppression. Individuals who hold fast to an ideology of meritocracy are holding on to the idea of the Horatio Alger myth. This myth argues that we all just need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and make something out of our lives. But what if we don't have boots? What do we do then? What is value changes with each generation. Power and how it is garnered changes over time. Take some time to reflect on how class is represented in television, film, and advertising. What classes are represented? What classes are ignored? Why do you think this is the case? What class position do you hold? Is it represented in media and represented accurately? Lastly, we will define gender roles. Gender roles are expectations about the proper behavior, attitudes, and personality traits for males and females. Gender and sex are not the same. Sex refers to one's genitals, whereas gender refers to one's degree of masculinity and femininity. A larger determining factor in the construction of gender is socialization. Boys and girls in our society are, for the most part, socialized differently in preparation for their assigned gender roles. For example, girls are socialized to develop their nurturing capabilities, and boys are socialized to develop aggressiveness. This is socially constructed. Neither boys nor girls are inherently more nurturing or aggressive than the other sex. Gender roles and relationships vary across time and from society to society. Gender inequality is an issue across the globe. Typically, men have more wealth, power, and prestige in most societies. These types of societies are patriarchal. Now that we have defined and discussed general ideas of race, class, and gender, let's now apply those concepts to media. Racialized, classed, and gendered terms reduce varied and complex humans into categories. Media tend to do the same through the use of stereotypes. Stereotypes are a form of social control according to the film theorist Robert Stam. Stereotypes in media are thought to be random, however, they are oppressive. Stereotypes inflict psychological damage systematically through negative portrayals of the groups associated with them. This damage is often internalized, whereby those stereotyped believe the stereotypes about themselves. This is part of interpolation. Media and other social institutions interpolate members of society by defining what it means to be an individual. Media teach viewers what it means to be a man, woman, citizen, and other categories. Representation is important because it validates existence. Media is owned and is a means to production. Media produces ways of seeing and perceiving. Media, for the most part, have been controlled by white elite men. Because imagery was made from their point of view, all other groups are compared to this standard. Let's focus on racialized stereotypes specifically. Film scholars Harry M. Benshoff and Sean Griffin contend that Hollywood has rewritten our racist and ethnocentric past in order to downplay our role in national tragedies such as slavery or the so-called Indian Wars. In addition, Benchoff and Griffin assert that few Hollywood films have challenged racist and ethnocentric assumptions and have helped bring about social change. Think for a moment about your racial identity. How do you describe it? How is it represented in television, movies, and advertising? With racial representation, any group that is not white is othered. Often, stereotypes placed on people of color are inverted to describe whiteness. Stereotypes are oversimplified images of a person or group. For example, African Americans are stereotyped as loud and athletic. White Americans are stereotyped as mild-mannered and intellectual. Media studies scholars Benchoff and Griffin argue that one problem with stereotypes is that they are unsupported leaps in logic and assume that everyone of a certain group is naturally inclined to exhibit these traits, thus reducing complex human diversity to simple-minded and judgmental assumptions. In addition, they state that under white patriarchal capitalism, ideas about race and ethnicity are constructed and circulated in ways that tend to keep white privilege and power in place. They also claim that, by and large, the average moviegoer thinks about issues of race only when seeing a movie about a racial ethnic group that they do not belong to. Whiteness usually goes unnoticed by those who consider themselves to be white. However, many non-white individuals are often painfully aware of the dominance of whiteness because they are repeatedly excluded from its privileges. Reflection. Can the same be said for gender and class? Are there entities that control media representation of gender and class groups, thereby directing how we think and see these groups? How do you identify with characters in television or film?